This episode is sponsored by you.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Soul Mechanics. We're not doing reality checks.
No.
All you spotters out there,
This is
welcome.
An introductory video of sorts for some of the new people we have, some of the new spotters, which there are people
Hi,
who are
welcome.
not fans of the channel, who I don't think even know the channel exists yet, but are working with us to some extent or another. People who I'd consider to be initiates of the sort that, you know, I'm kind of recruiting for the most part, people that I'm asking to help us out in some way or another who are interested in doing so, who I refer to as spotters, and of course they have questions as to what that means, which is one of the primary reasons for this video, is to give them the gist of that, but also to give them the gist of what the initiative is, and ultimately what the premise and purpose of the channel is, what its general functionality is. And this is kind of to set us in stone here, sort of a trailer video for the channel overall and for what we're doing ultimately. So we're just going to go ahead and discuss it. This will be a part of the sidetracks course, so the both of us may feel free to go ahead and jabber on as we damn well please. So,
like you do.
Yeah. So anyways, as regards spotters, we have a standard definition for that on the initiative page that I've given to some of the people that I'm referring to here. Special shout out to them. There's a few of them, but most particularly my eyeball guy from the Acid Paradise group, which blocked me. But
Eyeball guy? What's eyeball?
He's got an eyeball as his logo.
Oh.
And I thought that was the first thing that attracted me to him. Then I started reading his comments, and as it happens, he's just... There's a variety of things with this particular person that is his rhetoric, his semantics, his ability, his willingness, his drive to go ahead, like everything about him, his interest, that everything lines up perfectly for him to serve this role, most especially the factor that I posted something to this Acid Paradise group referring to the Contact Project and to what we're doing with the True Life crew and all of that. The podcast, this was about a week ago or so, but regarding the podcast, the Contact Project, and the bigger the event that we're plotting to host between all the groups, particularly myself and Joyce Sigers, who, special shout out to Joyce and her Dirty Little Pixels crew.
I like that. That's cute.
And we're going to be hosting that together, but we're intending to host it primarily through the United Continents of Earth page. So shout out to Matt Heckert, the director of that group as well. I suppose it's going to be the three of us that are trying on that one, on this network-wide event that we haven't plotted it out yet entirely, but we have an idea as to what we're going to do, and as soon as we got all the directors together in line for it, we're going to plot that out. But look forward to it. It's going to happen, relatively shortly. But we are the United Continents of Earth, the UCE. They are our global hub, so that's where we're going to be hosting it as a promotional endeavor for everybody, but moreover as a promotional endeavor for the channel and for our investigation into the ANE, the deeper than you think channeling.
Alright, you derailed the eyeball guy.
Yeah, eyeball guy is in the Acid Paradise group. I introduced this event to them, and I suggested they join in. I let them know that we would be promotional in return to them in any way we could, of course, and promote them via the network, allow for everybody to intermingle, work together. And what I got was a series of like 30 some odd comments, like immediately within the first hour, of a bunch of people just saying the stupidest shit, like nobody gives a shit, and like just making ridiculously inept jokes that weren't even like humorous in any way, and just being trolling.
Yeah.
And then I got a few people who came back and said, this group's full of trollers. You might want to just try and contact the admins directly. And I said, okay, I'll go ahead and do that, I suppose.
I wonder what causes that. Like, somebody starts a group, the admins, and they're like, hey, we want to do this, or have a page about this, where's all the fans, and then just so happens to be a bunch of people that are fans of this one thing are like asshole trollers.
Yeah,
Like,
especially with
that's so
psychedelics.
weird.
I mean, it leads me to believe that these are either like young kids who aren't very experienced in any way, or they're frauds. Because I mean, people who are invested in psychedelics, and especially psychedelic exploration,
are not
are
like
going
that.
to have grown out of that. And I specifically stated,
That is super weird.
I asked, is this a group for psychonauts, or am I mistaken? Because honestly, if I had seen this sort of behavior, what they had posted, most especially the fact that it was like crude and unintelligent, it was like really bad humor, like not even good shit, but that it was obnoxious and just without any base whatsoever to it, no purpose in it. And I stated, had I seen this sort of behavior in any one of our groups, any network group, I mean, not even just ours, like directly, but anybody that worked with us, I'd be thoroughly embarrassed, like humiliated by this, and probably have to shut the group down because of it. And I guess the admins must have decided to side with the trollers to some extent, because it seems like I can still go to the group, I can still see what people have to say to each other, but I'm not allowed to comment.
Weird.
So I saw this dude commenting. This dude was thoroughly equipped. He is very obviously a spotter coming into his own. So I decided to contact him directly and give him some pointers on sort of what was not like a debate, but a discussion he was having with somebody else, and he had questions about this discussion that I don't think they were adequately answering. So I answered for them, and I offered him some pointers, and then I got around to asking him, well, listen, I need somebody kind of repping us in this group, just, in hopes to kind of get through to the people in the group and change their mind about being such awful trollers. But because, I mean, if not, then we're going to have to effectively lock them off of the network, and perhaps even it could result in their group getting shut down at some point, and I don't want to see that happen. It's a big group, it's like 40,000 people or something.
Jesus.
So that's,
Well, I didn't know that. That's nuts.
Yeah, especially considering that it's that many people, but those are the only responses I got from a psychedelics group.
Yeah,
like,
that's
that's
weird.
embarrassing, guys. I'm sorry.
I'm sure there are others.
That's really embarrassing. There should be others, but that
Yeah.
they aren't the ones responding, that they're not saying anything, especially sticking up for their group in light of this. It's just, that's an embarrassment. I'm sorry. I can't. That's crappy. So this guy is going to hopefully serve as our rep for that group and try to get across to them, values at the very least. Of course, we're not going to be extending an open invitation to them in this regard, as regards the initiative directly, but I do hope that we can get some shit across to them and hopefully kind of assist with that, outgrowing that behavior. So that's the primary dude. That's what the guy who actually inspired me to make this video, because he asked about spotters. I gave him the description that we have, the definition, the working definition of spotters, and like a kind of a little dialogue I wrote as regards how I
it's
feel
kind of
about
your
it.
term. You kind of
Yeah,
coined it, I would say.
We cemented, myself and her and my brother, her husband, cemented the term spotters, but it was mine. I came up with it. And I just feel that, I mean, the definition says everything that needs to be said about it. But I felt it was the simplest, most all-encompassing term we could use for the tradition that we are a part of, which essentially spotters are going to be like particularly people involved with philosophical endeavors, people involved with psychedelics exploration, and psychedelics exploration includes dream works, it includes meditation practices, but people who are involved with spiritual interests, but not necessarily spiritualities overall.
Yeah, in a general sense, people that are open,
Yeah.
and have their eyes open, and also are always asking questions and questioning things.
People who are not satisfied with what's presented at face value and see through it. People who are seeking for deeper meanings, who see the deeper meanings, who can see value. People who can see values, interpret values, essentially, who learn to read the world like a dream and thereby communicate with the living world as a greater entity. And people who recognize the life in the world, who see it transpiring, who have the eyes to see this happening and see the life in each other. People who see each other, see, namaste, see deity in each other. And people who are looking out for each other. People who got their eyes on the ball, essentially. Now, operative spotters, these are going to be people that are actively engaging the initiative, people that were born into the initiative, people that are a part of the initiative. So, the tradition of spotters, essentially, the primary tradition that isolates them, in a manner of speaking, that comes first and foremost, but behind and beneath the deeper aspect to it, beyond the philosophical pursuits and beyond the spiritual traditions, is people specifically who are very much like we know for a fact when I've mentioned this before, but when I did the Heathen Hour podcast, the Pelagia dude, one of the dude who interviewed me, he had worked on the set of a Star Wars film, and he knew the producers and he knew George Lucas, and he actually ascertained, he thought something different, but he had actually ascertained for us that the tradition of the concept of the Jedi is based on the tradition of spotters, and it's basically the same thing. It's people who communicate with the living world and with synchronicity, who utilize synchronicity and are aware of the life in the world, and most specifically pass this tradition down, ensure the survival of this tradition.
That's cool that you brought up the Star Wars thing, though, because do you remember years ago when we were coming up that we used to refer to slight manipulations as the Jedi mind trick, when you are able to get someone to do something for you or convince someone of something by using a mental sleight of hand in such a way that it
sleight
was
of mind.
Sleight of mind, exactly. It was like a Jedi mind trick.
That's what spot casting is. Spot casting is essentially the Jedi mind trick in play, and that spot casting involves all kinds of practices. It involves neurolinguistic programming. It involves hypnosis. It involves all sorts of shit. But I mean,
there are those who are just naturally good at it, though.
But there is a distinction between like the light side and the dark side. There's a truth to that, in the sense that some people learn these practices and they go what we tend to refer to as being renegade, where they will effectively become entirely self-serving, perhaps in a manner of speaking, sell out to the ANE, to the influences in play that are negatively manipulative. And so we need to clear up that the term manipulation and the very prospect of manipulation is not to be regarded a negative thing.
Not automatically. It absolutely can be, but
right. We use spot casting to manipulate people in such a way as to benefit them and to bring about a greater understanding for them of it, how it's working, how it's playing out.
That's the easier route, too. Like, I always have people come to me with, problems and stuff, and, sometimes it's just like, oh, I need to talk or whatever, but I find this happens, like, usually it's my family members or whatever, but I find this happens often. And really, the simplest and easy and fastest way to get kind of past some blockages and get stuff out in the open, the more harder truths, the harsher truths, the things that people don't really want to sit and look at, is to basically just kind of go around their negative, the impact of negativity on certain words or certain aspects, certain things, is to just basically go around them and kind of trick them into looking at it face to face. Yeah, it's negative and it's scary, but you have to be able to evaluate it and see it in yourself to be able to deal with it and adapt.
And as operatives of the initiative, it is our duty and it's our honor, but it's our service and it's our privilege. It's our responsibility to ensure that people reclaim their responsibility, that people start to wake up
Yeah.
in a real way, not this woke shit we hear about, but actually wake up, achieve a certain degree of lucidity, so that we can prevent what catastrophes might lie in the future, so that we can ensure that we survive through this great shift that is indeed occurring,
But the
process in
responsibility
our evolution.
aspect is a really big thing nowadays, and I guess it could be, it's not necessarily new, I don't want to say that, but it seems to pop up a lot.
Well, it's because it's being
Yes,
threatened,
it's people have done everything they can to kind of drip drop breadcrumb like trail of responsibilities behind them everywhere they go, and so it's not like when somebody hits rock bottom and they just let go of all of their responsibilities. Now I'm seeing more often is throughout a long period of time, people that kind of drop little tiny ones, like, I'm not responsible for that, I'm not responsible for that. And so years and years go by when you don't even notice that you're doing this, dropping tiny little responsibilities, and eventually you're stuck in a spot where you're basically a victim who's made themselves a victim.
Right, and something that you're going to find is that premise for the soul mechanics ideology, I suppose you could say, which, mind you, passing on the tradition, the lineage, the legacy of being a spotter, and especially of the initiative, it's not a matter of sharing beliefs, it's not a matter of sharing ideologies, it's a matter of sharing an attitude towards life that is accepting of responsibility, of personal responsibility.
Well, because that's free will. If you don't want,
Exactly.
if you don't want responsibility, if you don't want to have to make choices, then you are basically saying you don't want your free will.
Yes, and people confuse these things because the premise of what ideology we do have to share, us personally, is the time mechanics or the soul mechanics.
But that's all very simplistic too. It doesn't mean that you can't also believe in, a Christian Jesus or Krishna or Buddha,
and you could
or
say
whatever.
that this is an attitude in and of itself rather than an ideology, but it's basically the one fundamental premise we have is that we as reflective entities, as reflective creatures, life itself as we know it, experience being a reflection of the source, whatever you want to call it. I like to call it God because I respect the term. You're free to call it whatever you want to, or
the
just
universe,
life. A reflection of what is the overall greater soul. Which soul mechanics is the mechanics of the soul that we are all sharing. One of the fundamental premises is that being as a reflection of it, we are in fact witnessing it, we are comprehending in reverse. And so in most cases things are seen backwards, in the sense that, for example, we, like she just said, we drop minuscule responsibilities, but you're going to find that it's the minuscule responsibilities that are at the base of you and affect all the others, and eventually become the basic premise upon which you're standing, which is what we see so often. And the reason that there is a dark side to it, and that the dark side in fact could be considered more powerful in a manner of speaking, is because
usually it is.
And the reason it spreads so easily, the reason that the ANE is such a prevalent programming, and that it's such a difficult nemesis to be battling against, is because
it's the easy way out.
Yeah, it makes use of the underlying functioning of the system. It's just like religion made use of values that were already in play with the system and warped
exactly.
them.
It's the responsibility thing. It's the people look at it and say, well, shit, I don't have to, I can do these things and I don't have to be responsible for anything that I am or that I think or that I do. That sounds awesome. Let's do that. And so, of
see
course,
it backwards, and they mistake free will as being free of responsibility, whereas it's responsibility that
gives you the free will,
that gives you that power. And the reason it's so easy, such an easy trick to pull, Like, for example, religion pulled this so easily by making use of these values already in place, because forfeiting a certain degree of responsibility is how you engage the dream. It's how you become a part of the illusion. It's how you play this game. It's how you play the character that you've created. If you accepted the full weight of your responsibility, you'd no longer be the person you think you are.
Yeah, it's the Carl Rogers thing. It's the incongruence between your ideal self and your real self, the person that you're walking around thinking that you are, but when you actually sit down and look at it and evaluate, those are kind of usually a little bit far off, and the whole purpose of it is to try and get those things closer to each other.
Yeah, so it's easy to convince people to forfeit responsibility because intrinsically there's a part of them at the basest level that intends to do that.
Yeah, I mean, kind of. What's easier than just being a victim?
Right.
Because it starts out with you not having to make any choices, not having to be responsible for the consequences of those choices, and then after that it's like the Munchausen's thing when you get sympathy and people feeling bad for you because you're a victim of those things that you had no choice in, and so it keeps going around and around like that, and it feels great. It feels awesome. You just have to sit there and lay back and have something take you over, and then afterwards you're like, hey everybody, this thing, it's I'm hurt because of that, and everyone's oh no, poor you, and it's a great feeling to just, I guess you could liken it to just being washed away down a stream or something. You just throw your arms back and let it ride.
Yeah, and mind you, this is a lot of the factors that we're presenting now, the values that we're presenting here, are findings from the investigation that we're currently doing into the ANE and into channeling, and our purpose of that investigation, which I'm going to elucidate in our next video. For now, just give that as a little foreshadowing, just in case anybody's wondering where the investigation's going. A lot of what we're presenting as we do is being found as we move along.
Yeah, it's never not going.
Yeah.
It doesn't.
This is the greater investigation here into this. What we're thinking of as being the true enemy in play. And that's the reason why we do in fact need to trick people, because they're playing against themselves.
Kind of.
So, I mean, it's not only is it not inherently a negative or bad or wrong thing to be manipulative towards people, but in many cases you have to. And as I stated to this person who said to me he doesn't want to, I asked him, I said, well, we need to be changing people's minds about being so negative and divisive. And he said, well, I don't really want to be changing people's minds because there's a part of him that believes there's something wrong about doing that. But no, we're all sharing the same mind.
Yeah.
Somebody needs to be in the driver's seat, because we are in fact driving blind right now as a global entity.
There's a lot of things that have been stamped, that have been marked, that have been notarized to be as being negative, when in reality there's a gray area. Things like, like you were talking about religion, things like sex or your naked body or something, and that's disgusting and dirty and awful and bad. But really, it's what you have. It's what you are walking around in. And what's bad about it, other than when people take it and do crazy shit. Like I just heard that story about some Cleveland cop that's going to jail for peeing on a 12-year-old girl at a bus stop. That is dirty and bad, and don't do that with your body.
Yeah,
but just walking around, just living your life, that's not bad. A
basic premise of free will in play, which for one of our viewers, somebody who came over from the Anti-Ordinary channel during our high noon with her, he spoke to the nature of free will and it being an unprovable factor. And of course, I have to agree. It's entirely unprovable. That's a fucking nightmare trying to get into that. You can't even approach it.
So what a beautiful thing that shows right there, is that your life is to basically prove or disprove. Go forth, go figure it, go prove or disprove, and that's your those are your choices, and the entirety of your experiences and your character and your personality go for it. That's the whole fucking point, is to try and prove or disprove.
Yeah, and here comes in a bit with the time travel thing, the time travel aspect, which the time travel concept in and of itself and how we're presenting it here and intend to make use of it, which we've already made use of it, you're just not seeing it yet. Even we aren't seeing the full breadth of it yet, but there's so many different ways, so many different avenues, so many different perspectives on that, but ultimately something I had to put into play for myself, a factor that comes into play is that personally I believe thoroughly, and I have in fact proven to myself, of course I can't prove that anything's absolutely real or certain, but insofar as regards my experience, I've proven to myself that time travel is a possibility, that it can be done, and that overall, if time travel is a reality, then at some point in the future, particularly at the end point, which is, again, if we're viewing things from this time mechanics or soul mechanics perspective, it's the value of the thing existent in the future, the extant reality as it's happening then, that is producing the explanation leading up to it. As by measure of the scientific method, it needs to explain its existence. And so what we think of as being the God factor, which is what I think of as us creating this conglomerate perfection in the future, this perfected soul we eventually become, is telling its backstory right now. It already exists.
I like that.
Now, if time travel is a reality in the future, that means that anybody can come back from any point in the future and affect any alterations they can. However, a paradox in that is that if somebody comes back, affects an alteration that fucks up the future, what do? They have to try again, they have to try again, they have to keep changing it until it's perfect. So, if time travel is indeed a reality, it only works if it's already been worked out perfectly. And I think that's kind of a perspective you could have on having faith, that at some point in the future, we've already made it, we've already gotten everything figured out, we have to have already perfected our story in order for it to be playing out at all. And I don't believe for a second that you can just disappear, that your consciousness can just vanish upon, demise. So in order for us to be existing now, we exist in the future, and in the future we've affected this. Plus, there's so many different perspectives on that. The general quantum mechanics understanding, general scientific understanding that time is a non-existent factor in a manner of speaking, that
That's
time
like one
is a
of the
matter of
hardest
perspective.
things, scientifically speaking, is time.
Yeah, but time is necessary. Time is the very factor and concept of measurement in and of itself. You can't have experience without time. Time,
relativity.
Time is what creates the very idea of space itself. Dimensionality springs forth from time occurring. 1 second creates eternity, and eternity is the construct upon which we're working. So,
yeah, that's a weird one.
Yeah, it's a little convoluted, and of course, again, we can't prove it one way or the other, but those are some values to put into play, especially considering this whole idea, this attitude of having faith in our endeavor. Now, speaking to the endeavor in and of itself is the initiative. Now, Boob and I had launched, my brother Boob and I had launched several different little pioneering organizations, as it were, concept designs we wanted to put in play. The Garden Program, Project Philanthropy, which is from where Sweetie Cheeks comes. We wanted to make essentially a grouping of persons that would be trained specifically in this lineage, in this legacy, as spotters to pass on that legacy and to collect and ultimately work towards establishing the nature of an absolute situation, which is overall what we're doing with the Contact Project, with everything, is trying to come to an overall basic understanding of everything that is no longer full of contradictions and uncertainties, that we can actually come to an understanding that we can all share to some extent, so that we can effectively move forward from that platform and no longer run into so many of the problems that we do. But we had made these groupings, and we intended to launch all these different facets of it, and the Status Initiative was one of them, but the Status Initiative was effectively launched as its own organization for the most part in 2001, when we considered that 9/11 was essentially 911. It was a distress call, an emergency call from life itself, from the God concept, from the world, sounding out an alarm. We're in trouble. Something needs to be done here. And so we effectively launched the status initiative. Now, it's spread out all over the place from person to person. Just as spotters train each other, spotters will train one initiate to pass on the legacy to another. When a spotter is mastered, they go forth in the world, they learn from the world itself, the living world, and eventually synchronicity leads them to a student that they will train. I've run into several students now, a few of which have actually mastered and passed on the legacy, including Sweetie Cheeks, who's passing it on as we speak. But the online faction of the Status Initiative was launched just recently.
Yeah, that's a more new.
And that's where the network comes into play, because the network is essentially all of the groups and the channels and everything that we've collected working together on this, spreading the word, and that's what I'm speaking to when I mention operatives in play, is operatives of the initiative. But this idea that I had and that Boob had and that we shared and eventually, spread around, of there being this initiative, the underlying idea is that there are people who are born into this, or at least people who have the innate potentiality for it and the tendency or the inclination for it, for this interest in this practice, and that are generally good at it and are going to have an innate interest for it. But that they, as I said, they were born into it, as in, it's almost like, if you want to consider reincarnation a reality, that people, just, this is a part of their soul or their person, as it were, being born into whatever body, that it's who they are fundamentally. And later on, this is a general idea we had, that the initiative was not isolated to our faction of it, that it was a worldwide endeavor that was, a general kind of lineage in humanity itself. But later on, we run into this woman, Dolores Cannon, who sadly she's passed away now, but she did a series of experimental hypnosis sessions, doing what effectively amounts to past life regressions, wherein I guess the vast majority of her subjects who did the past life regressions all reported that they were part of a three-wave endeavor of volunteers that came here all at this specific time, within this specific time frame, to serve the purpose of ensuring humanity's survival and continuance through this phase in our evolution, this phase in our
she's not the only one to kind of refer to.
Yeah, a lot of people have had this idea, which I had the idea, Boob had the idea, but she cemented it when she came back with these research findings that these people were all reporting precisely the same thing, that they were part of an endeavor of volunteers coming here for this particular purpose at this particular time. There are three waves of them. Now, our generation...
one of my favorite theories is that the reason that the population is so high is actually because there's a long line of souls, kind of.
Yeah, that was Robert Monroe had that idea
like
too.
kind of waiting to get into this time specifically because of the transformation and because things are happening at such an accelerated rate. Yeah, she calls it quantum healing hypnosis technique, QHHT.
Now I'm going to give you some links. I'll give you links to her videos, and I'll give you links to another YouTuber I know who... I'm not going to get into him here. He is a target asset. His name's Aaron Doherty. I'm going to give you a link to him. He has ideas that I'm not sure I agree with, but for the most part, he's an operative of the initiative. He's one of our people. He is, in fact, a target asset. Him directly. I'm going to give him a link to this so he can see it, and he can understand where we're coming from with this. But for the most part, this is our endeavor, is this initiative, this worldwide initiative that operatives are being born into, and our purpose as the faction we are, the Status Initiative, ultimately is to be a networking organization, to find the other factions, to find the other clusters, and to bring them together, to unify them, and ultimately to try and provide this established absolute situation or paradigm that we can all be working from together. And so we want to raise debates. We want people to raise questions. We need to be debating each other so that we can come to a consolidated understanding.
Which is something, I might add, an actual civil, kind, curious, investigatory debate takes a great amount of responsibility and courage and respect. And so it's very hard for people to do that because for some reason, I don't know what it is, but it's really hard for people to remain open.
It's because of this programming that's playing off of their essentially insecurities.
And it's kind of builds itself from the insecurities because no one necessarily has to agree with anything just to be able to talk and exchange ideas.
Except
and so
in
the point is of having a free give and take of ideas.
The primary exacting factor and the broken value that establishes and most prominently reinforces this ANE, as we're calling it, this negativity algorithm, it's the cognitive dissonance factor, which again was put into play by modern religion and other such cultist influences that essentially is like a parasite in the system that attaches itself to your sense of identity. We don't recognize this because we see it as being an association between one's beliefs and one's sense of personal identity. But it is an existing entity in and of itself. It's like a parasite that's attached to your identity that causes for you to misrepresent yourself, and it's not really even a bad, it's kind of like a malfunction, but it is the psyche serving its primary function of immersing you in the illusion.
Yeah, I don't think it would happen at all if it wasn't like a natural human thing. I mean, obviously it's a natural human thing. So many people do it. I've done it. I'm sure you have. It's everybody has or will or whatever. It's a natural part of being a human. But again, like some of the more prominent religions would say, and I hate to I don't know, I'm not a religious person, I don't want to be a part of that, but I truly think that when challenges come, they're there for a reason, and that things happen for a reason, and if you're being challenged by yourself, then that's an opportunity for a solution to create something better.
Everything happens with reason. Reason is what I speak to when I speak to values in play is basically reasons or purposes, while aspects that attach to values are the meanings that we attach to a value, that they're the associative properties, while the values are the implicative properties, the relationship again between value and matter as we know it. Is matter emerges from value, which is like the base programming, the HTML of existence.
Yeah, but you, I think, personally, like to boil things down into their most simplistic forms, which I think is confusing for people a lot of the times.
Yes. But, I mean, that's
But
really...
it's simple. Like, I think what you're seeing
that's what we
is
need
the
to do.
Simple thing of a thing, and people find that hard to understand.
Because in order to establish an absolute situation, we're all going to have to be agreeant upon it, because ultimately that is the absolute situation. Whatever we all agree upon universally, that's how physics itself, it comes into play, is we have an agreed upon understanding of physics in play.
Yeah, the truth is what we make it.
The primary fundamental elements of existence, gravity, memory, relativity, and that's what functions as physics. And we all have a pretty basic understanding. In order to come to a shared understanding, it has to be as simple, as vague, and as broad as is possible, because people are going to have differing names for what they think of as being God. People are going to have differing religious upbringings,
and
but
even different definitions.
Yes,
for
different
things.
definition is what makes us happen. We are all just definitions transpiring. So definition and thereby language is our primary operating system as
of course
creative entities.
It would be ideal, for everyone to agree upon certain definitions and words and ideals, but that's not necessarily the case, which is
And
fine. That's not bad.
It's not the way the game plays. It's not the fun way to be. You want to be individuated. You want to be an individual, but at the same time, again, this process of becoming individual and isolating to ourselves, this cultist influence upon it, what's the word? It
infects.
It corrupts it by going a step further and causing for us to further that by dividing from each other, by no longer playing as individual entities in the greater game, but by breaking our part of the game away from others and suggesting that somehow it's so unique unto itself that it's not to be regarded as that we discriminate.
Yeah, almost like if you really can't agree with another person, and you can't agree, and you can't agree, and you can't agree, eventually you have to agree to disagree, which is still an agreement, which is still a valuable thing to have between two people or two groups or whatever.
And then therein lies there's the T on the whole responsibility factor, is that the one thing that you can't opt out of is making a decision. If you choose not to decide, you'll still have made a choice. Choice is everything. You do have free will in any and every endeavor, so that's the fundamental premise there. Now, what these cultist influences convince you of is that you are to feel shame for certain options. You're to feel shame for having made decisions that you weren't afforded. You're not afforded the choice to not have a choice. So thereby you have to accept responsibility for the choices that you do make, and you're convinced of feeling shame for certain options, even just for them being in play. And so in feeling shameful, thereby you're feeling a threat to your personal identity. The cognitive dissonance factor kicks in, and this is why we confuse uniqueness and our individuality as with this discrimination factor, is because we not only feel as though we're different from other people in a certain way, but we feel as though the differences are threatening
and
us.
It's an affront to your entire being when someone disagrees with you.
Right, so that's something you need to take into consideration. Anybody watching, if anything that we're saying here feels in any way threatening to you or pisses you off, makes you mad, if you have irrational responses in any sense that makes you want to turn away,
and it's a challenge.
Think about why. Always question why.
Question everything. Question absolutely everything.
Yeah,
even your own, and you know what, more so than other shit, question your own thoughts and feelings.
Yeah, your own determinations.
That's another crazy thing that I always hated so much was, the basic teaching of everyone, don't worry, your feelings and your thoughts, you can't control those.
Right.
That's bullshit.
Bullshit.
Yeah. That's
because
bullshit.
We're witnessing it backwards. We're not realizing that our thoughts and our feelings are feedback resulting from the fallout of our decisions. Mm-hmm. We think that our decisions are based upon our thoughts and our feelings, but again, we're seeing things backwards. We're looking in the mirror. Yeah. So that's like I said, that's the rub for that one. But as we were saying about the initiative, is that it does in fact seem very much so. You might not want to regard it as scientific evidence because it's not provable via material measures.
Fine.
There's no utilities that can prove this.
We're not here to claim that anything that we're talking about is 100% scientific, proved, and repeatable. We're just asking questions.
But as regards our method of investigation, as I've stated, we're going to be taking these factors into account, wherein eyewitness testimony, personal experience, that is, if you haven't experienced something firsthand, you cannot prove it to yourself. You don't know for certain. Thereby, your personal experience is the only truly proving factor in any given equation. So, for us, especially like we see with the New Age atheist community, suggesting that personal experience and witness testimony is not to be regarded as evidence, that's backwards. Again, yes, it is evidence. We're going to take it into account.
And at the very
if there's so
least,
many of these testimonies,
at the very least, it's evidence to the individual.
Yes.
Even if it's not to us or to other people, who somebody experiences something, Who the fuck are we to say that they, didn't?
Right, and people are also going to suggest, people in these circuits are going to suggest that, if it seems as though you might be assigning a personal meaning to an experience, then it's to be regarded as meaningless. Again, we have coincidence as being something to be dismissed out of hand because it's coinciding. That's the purpose of it. Now, if you take into account that there is an existing overall collective consciousness, which, I mean, we know there's too much evidence to the effect. It's not something that we can dismiss. But you make that decision, ultimately, that's where the divide comes into play, the actual divide. The divide is not between, like, science and religion, or science and mysticism, or religion and atheism, or what have you. The divide is between whether you see life in the world or you don't. And that's a matter of your decision. And most people are being tricked into disregarding their personal experience because, as I was saying, you regard something, when you assign a personal meaning to something, it's to be regarded as meaningless because you assigned it. Well, no, you're the arbiter. You're the one making the decisions as to what means what to you. Thereby, yes, you're allowed, you have that responsibility, you have that power. You're allowed to assign meaning to things. In fact, it's your primary function.
Yeah, you experience the natural world through your own perceptions, which is how it's supposed to work.
Right. And so where synchronicity comes into play, especially as we're seeing it when you get further along in this game, being a spotter, working with spotcasting, working with synchronicity, you'll come to find that the meanings that you assign to things tend to line up with other people. It's like reading a dream dictionary. As these things become simpler and broader, the meanings will line up and you'll see them in everything. And so where it gets to that point, you can in fact read the world like a dream. You can speak the language of God, as it were, see the voice of God in the world, understand it, communicate with it. And at this point, you're being fed evidence firsthand from your experience that's showing you it will teach you if you engage it, if you decide to acknowledge life, a presence of life in the world, and communicate with it, commune with nature, as it were. It will show you everything firsthand.
That speaks to the first thing that I said in this video is just open your eyes, open your mind. That's all. That's it. Just experience what you are experiencing. Don't let somebody else tell you what's what or what means what. Right. You can figure it out for yourself and then go forth and share those things with other people and see what they're experiencing. And if those things happen to line up, that's awesome. And if they don't, that's fine too.
Read it like a dream, as I've stated so many times. Like, even therein, where we consider dreams to be fictitious creations of the mind, but the psyche is the bottom line of identity. It's the bottom line of reality. So that's moving closer to the core of what actually is substantial and real. The immaterial is actually the more consolidated, solid factor of existence. Matter, in so many ways, most especially in our scientific understanding of what matter even is not solid, it's not
it's very
real,
mysterious.
And thereby you could easily ascertain that your dream life is probably more real than this life, but is differing levels of the same thing. It's all a dream, in a manner of speaking. It's all a dream we're having, an illusion, but at the same time, that's the reality of it. We're creating it. That's the actual happening reality in play is what's created.
I personally like we're creating our own realities type of thinking about the universe and how things work, because there's so many perceptions individually, and when you lump all of those together, there's no way to know what the fuck is happening outside of your own perception. And we've already proven scientifically that your brain doesn't know the difference between a memory and an actual experience. So who the hell are we to say which one's which?
Well, we don't.
Exactly.
Because the fact of the matter is that that's the value inherent in that. The value behind that consideration is that the
bottom
brain,
line, it doesn't matter either.
The brain is an instrument that is existent for no other purpose than to discern reality. and to make determinations. It knows what's real. So when the brain tells you, and this is again what values are doing in the world, they're telling you, they're speaking to you. The world is telling you something. It's telling you a story. It's the shifting glyphs. So when the brain tells you that it doesn't recognize a difference between reality and imagination, what is that implying? What's the value behind that?
Yeah, the implication.
There is no difference.
Is that there's no difference. And if there were, and somehow we figured that out, it's still, it wouldn't matter, because you take what you're given in this life, and that's all you can create. You can create as much as you want or destroy, but you're still just you.
Yeah. And I mean, ultimately, another basic premise behind that being that is the case, and that's the value inherent in the presentation of the brain in and of itself. You don't exist outside of your brain. You're seeing everything through the filter of that utility. Everything is in your mind, thereby everything is the mind. The world is your mind. It's a reflection of your mind. Your perceptions of it is just that.
It's interesting that you use the word reflection, because even the way that our eyes work anatomically, I can't actually see you. All I see is the light reflecting off of whatever the fuck is right there, you know?
That's the value behind that. And as I've stated, that's the value of you seeing the light bouncing off of things, being the reflection that you're seeing, is that it's reflective. It is reflective of you.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of your senses. The other one, touch.
Where you can't
actually touch anything.
There's always
a layer of electrons.
And
so
that's clearly telling you
there's
that
no contact.
It is you. It is your mind. You can't get outside of yourself, because yourself is everything. Mm-hmm. And these are the values at the deepest level that are speaking to you, at almost the deepest level. Going any deeper than we're going right now brings us to approaching the boundary, which is something we're going to address later on in the investigation.
But it's very hard for most people to kind of put some of the stuff away and kind of just feel out some of the stuff that we're saying. And I know, obviously, we're lunatics and we're crazy and all that stuff, but I know what I feel. And
yeah, and here's the thing about it is that, okay, to address the initiative and the network as we're running it, and especially the status initiative, the function that it's serving behind the channel, the channel is an outlet of this that we're using. The channel is our tool that we're using to launch these investigations.
It's all just a tool to share,
but
things.
The initiative itself, the group pages we're running it particularly, but the network overall, is intended ultimately to be, and it is at this point, the largest, aside from the A&E itself, which is the social programming in play, the global spotcasting. Next to that, the initiative is currently the largest, most expansive intention experiment ever run, and we're continuing to grow it. And that's, if you take what we've suggested here into account, you have to consider that, and quantum mechanics shows us that consciousness has a directive influence upon the operation of matter and reality. We know, and they've launched intention experiments that prove that intention experiments can be effective in altering the outcome of probabilities.
Not even all the intention experiments, just some of them are just plain old experiments. The Baxter effect, for one, is one of my favorite ones.
Well, the Baxter effect, that's proving that, objects, especially plants, living objects, but all objects
still
are living,
have kind of
that there's a consciousness in play.
And an intention and
and that they
feelings
read our
of a certain sort.
But general ideology being that we create our own reality, and that altogether, wherever two or more are gathered, another value made use of by religion, to essentially, that's like gaslighting, where religion presents these values that are fundamentally correct. It's like sprinkling a bit of truth into your lie.
Those are the most convincing lies. Yeah.
It's to back it up and to reinforce what effectively amounts in the A&E or the cultist influence in play. Now, we are combating the ANE with this intention experiment, and we've been hugely successful. We've only failed on 2 occasions, and they were pretty much irreversible conditions that we really didn't have much of a chance with. But wherever the probabilities allowed for it, we've been entirely successful with the intention experiments that we've launched, and the more people that are involved, the greater this machine becomes capable.
But there are like you said, it's a large kind of intention experiment, but there are actual like papers in scientific journals about other intention experiments and the effects of them. There was one, it was like a mass meditation or something, and the cause and effect was, I believe,
Lower the crime
rate, and a few other things. And so there is documented.
They become most
intention
effective.
Experiments.
Yeah, they become most effective in actually addressing probabilities in play. So it's like statistical anomalies such as a crime rate's lowering. That's an easy one. Now, what we've dealt with, we've been pushing this intention experiment further in going after very specific outcomes.
Yeah, but some shit you can't measure, you know?
Well, but some shit you can.
Yeah.
Like, and this is all documented via the group page, too. It's documented on Facebook. It's documented via Soul Mechanics. So we have the evidence for you right here. I mean, you can look at what we had done, what we intended to do, the prompts that we put into play, which, again, if you're engaging the intention experiment, prayer is the same thing. When you pray to a god, essentially what you're doing is asking for a feedback response from the game. And the more...
Or the other way, which I like now, is getting more popular in the last few years, is mindfulness. That's kind of going the opposite way, is trying to...
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of call out from the inside what you are looking for, or
essentially where it comes to prayer as we know it with modern religion, that's another method by which they affect a division between the self and the soul. A self and God is to disconnect us from God, suggest that God or the soul is this exterior factor that's separated from us, and that it has some intention of its own, that it has a judgment
that
to be
there's
placed
also
on
a
us.
Blockage, it's kind of old world, but that blockage between yourself and the kind of the God aspect, that you don't actually have a through line to that you have to go through this other guy or this other person or this other organization or whatever it may be.
And we've spoken to religion, the nature of religion, the nature of atheism before, and I'm going to do further videos on that. We'll do further videos on that, actually. I'll get Sweetie Cheeks involved, but I'll do my own videos as well. But we'll address it further, and we'll more cement the situation as regards these factors. But basically, the general premise and what ultimately creates this divide and becomes this divide is that idea of there being a separation between yourself and nature and life, and that you're disconnected from it, and that not only now it's gone further from religion's taken it a step further by essentially attempting to, as the story tells, sacrifice the deity, commit deicide ultimately, and eliminate the God factor altogether by convincing us that it doesn't even exist. That's just like they say, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world that it didn't exist, but it's not the devil. The devil is this negative reinforcement. It's this, the actual devil in play, the actual nemesis, the actual enemy is this negative engagement.
It's stopping people from reaching their full potential.
And it is this concept of there being a division, and ultimately now this concept that we've done away with it altogether. However, even this can move in a positive direction, because if we can just manage to elucidate the factor that the consciousness exists, that there is life in the world, then we can effectively bridge the divide by simply understanding that no, there is no God, there is no God factor as we know it, no God entity, there's no old man on the clouds, there's no
making rules,
there's
and
no
punishing,
and judging
rewarding.
dictator.
I love the rewarding and the punishing. That's my favorite aspect. That's the funniest, most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life.
It's animal training.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like Pavlovian shit. Like,
it's how you condition an inhabited factor.
so
And
weird.
it's spot casting. It's all spot casting, except these are renegade influences that have made use of it in order to exact control over the populace for these purposes. But at the same time, could very well be that their intention was inevitably to come to this. However, of course, religion
I
put
know
this...
that's your theory, and it does kind of make sense. It does kind of make sense. It makes sense that there would be this, I guess, I don't know how you'd put it. I mean, worldwide fucking thing that's like got everybody on the puppet strings and making sure that no one does this, this, and this, and that everybody has to do this, this, and this. The religious thing it seriously ate the fucking planet, man. I mean, that's nuts.
Yeah.
But
It
then
seems
generations and generations and eons fucking later, that the children would kind of be resentful and what's the word I'm looking for?
Well, as the Greek legends had told, the children
but
would
us,
rise up and defeat
exactly,
the gods.
would rise up or rebel, I guess. Rebel, distance,
launch this uprising,
fucking
defeat
just
the gods,
get rid of it
and
altogether
then
because
thereby-
you're shitty about it.
Yeah.
And we've seen it so many times, and even I am guilty of this. My mom dragging me to church when I was little. By the time I'm like 13, I'm like, what are we even doing? You're literally dressing us up and we're going to a fashion show for Jesus every week because you want to look good in front of other people and everybody wants everybody else to see, look, I'm here and I look great and I'm a good person and I have, a potluck or whatever. And it's bullshit.
Yeah.
And so then you get pissed and you're like, I'm never doing anything like that ever again.
as regards the greater intention behind it, were it the case that it was intending to cause this uprising of sorts against the God concept, well, first of all, it put that dictatorial, tyrannical God concept into play. That figment God. This hidden fake God.
But it's
that
an
put into
easy
play.
way to control people.
And a mistake that's made thereby along the lines is wherein it states that thou shalt worship no graven image, yet we worship, Jesus, we worship a specific person. And I think maybe that was like an attempt to kind of divert it away from that initial Old Testament God and kind of put our faith in something that we can see as being loving and kind, but and sacrificing itself.
It's like a scapegoat almost kind of thing where you throw in some, like a hippie miracle worker guy that's feeding poor people or whatever, and then later on down the line when there are actual real issues, not stupid shit like, hey, should I kill this guy? Like, come on now, but more in-depth actual issues that people can't agree on, like, hey, can I decide who I'm gonna fuck tonight? Like, that kind of stuff. And the people who are like, absolutely not, what do you think this is? You're making your own choices? I don't think so. And everyone looks at those people like, wait a minute, I thought you were all about, like, being good and love and acceptance. And they're like, oh, yeah, we are, because look at the Jesus guy. We like him, so we're fucking awesome. But no, you can't have, you can't be gay and you can't be, sexual and you can't, it's like, it's a scapegoat. It's a scapegoat. Well, but we like Jesus, so we're cool. Or like, it's awful.
And I can see this leading us way far off on the other
direction.
I
think we're derailing a little bit.
We'll hold off on that. We'll talk about religion and stuff. Again, we're going to get into the secular theology course again, but to describe the channel, particularly the channel and the imperative factor of the initiative, where Sweetie Cheeks had mentioned the old concept of there being a blockage between us and God. That is, in fact, a factor, and we see this in the practices of the Kundalini as a perfect physiological representation of this, where we have access to this primal force, this greater intrinsic energy in us, but it's been blocked off.
That seems more like a protective measure.
Yes, and it's
not a protective measure to have to go to your priest to be able to pray and meditate and commune with the natural universe. That is a chop, a blocking, a wall. But the thing you're talking about seems like an auto shut off. Like, people shouldn't really, some people shouldn't be in control of that.
But it, again, as I've stated before, it's actually our innate disposition. Like, we should have access to this. It's just, it's been blocked off by all the psychological blockages that have been presented, especially shame factors and such.
That now it's dangerous.
And the chakras, as we know them, the chakra system in the human entity, the primary nerve clusters in the actual physiological organism are what the chakras actually are, but they are values in and of themselves, representative of what we're calling catalyst events. And catalyst events, I'm personally hypothesizing, are like artifacts of the first cause, remnants of the initial awakening, as it were, that they're the primary factors of the body of God itself, and they present, just as we have symptoms in the human body, and we have blockages in the nervous system, and we have, all sorts of diseases and all sorts of psychiatric ailments and just symptoms that present from blockages in these chakras, in the chakra system. We have what results in communities amassing around these catalyst events, these greater overall chakras of the human entity, and then we have these problem areas that occur in them. So technically, that you could regard the chakras themselves as being the artifacts, while the catalyst events are the symptoms of them being blocked. And we've already spoken, the one catalyst event was currency and our misrepresentation of value, our tendency to put our faith and our worship and our very our very consideration of our self-worth into this object that represents value, because we're not seeing real value. We're blocking ourselves off from actually engaging the reality of value itself, and we're blocking it off firstly by this concept of false value and what seems to be valuable to us, that we're exchanging currency in the form of money, but currency itself is speaking again to the current understanding, the agreed upon, which is an absolute situation,
ideas and definitions and
that's values. Why currency comes into play as the representative term for this.
It's a really interesting word, actually.
Currency represents an absolute situation, which speaks to the nature of God, which again places our worship on this false value. So that's how you can see language coming into play with it. Language being our operating system, which language in itself is another catalyst event.
Communication.
So we're what we are doing.
The throat chakra, by the way.
What we're intending to do ultimately overall with the channel is we have courses that each course is connected to a different catalyst event. For the most part, in and of itself, each course addresses a different catalyst event and different facets of them. But then what we're trying to do with the channel, with the collective and with the imperative, ultimately, is unite the tribes, as it were. We're trying to bring the communities that have isolated themselves and divided together by sharing this absolute situation as we investigate and interpret it.
Or just simply bringing shit up, because a lot of people, if you really look deeper into a lot of people agree on a lot of stuff, and there's like one or two things that are kind of stopping the collective from actually coming together. And so it's funny to see that most people that are, banging heads, our butting heads, I said banging heads, our butting heads actually do agree on many things.
They do, for the most part, we do agree on this absolute situation. We just haven't identified it yet. The reason being
we
that
just describe it in different ways.
That's the point. We have different definitions of it, in a manner of speaking. Not necessarily definitions, but descriptives. And that's the corruption in our language. That's the catalyst event inherent in communication, is this Tower of Babel scenario, as we've identified
we're all
it.
Separated. Why we need
and
telepathy.
That's where religion's story speaks to that, because and where as regards telepathy,
as a punishment, and no less.
Yes, and that's See, religion it can't help but tell the actual story. The voice of God gets through if you have eyes that see the values in play. It's there. It's present in everything. It's the holographic nature of reality.
Pick through the carcass to find bits of savory, important, things.
Meat.
Yes, exactly.
But as regards the imperative, we're trying to collect representatives from the different communities to spread the word on this, to get everybody collaborating, working together, and of course that's what the network is intended to do. Overall, that's the purpose of everything, is to unite everybody under a basic understanding. And again, we're not intending to kind of impose an understanding. We're intending to investigate and come to a collective understanding together. And that's what Soul Mechanics is intended to do, and ultimately present our findings in the most basic, simplest way in order to develop this machinery that we're creating, this device that allows for us to make use of the inherent resource technology in play, which is ultimately the basis of the intention experiment. So see, it all comes down to the same thing. It's convoluted as it stands. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to try and clean up the channel a little bit so that it's not so, complex and convoluted in itself.
You love that shit. That's funny. It's ultimately like getting two people that don't agree on one thing but agree on lots of other stuff into a fucking room together and throwing stuff around so that hopefully we can stop bickering at each other over stupid shit and start working and commiserating on the shit that's behind the scenes that we do agree with.
Right, and I mean, basically, it's what lies behind the scenes that's speaking to the value of the situation, and that's what the Soul Mechanics is intending to promote lucidity overall.
Wake up.
Trying to wake people up to the fact that this is a dream of sorts, but we can be awake in the dream, and by awakening to the dream and accepting our responsibility, having a discipline that allows for us to accept and make use of our inherent responsibility, you can in fact lucid dream this life.
Yeah.
We can take control of the physics in play. We can take control of the reality itself.
And there's a big butt booty there, which I've been trying to kind of get across to my younger protege, so to speak, is that when I said, wake up and become lucid and that kind of stuff, that it's very cool, it's very important, and it's a big thing, and it's a big deal, and it's something that everybody is capable of, but I think that you still should have the awareness while you're trying to do that or thinking about it, that part of the game that we're here and playing is that you're gonna forget again. You're gonna fall back asleep and wake up many, 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 many times over and over. And that's, I think, something that people don't, people say, oh, well, I'm enlightened now. And then boom, that's the rest of your life. You're good to go. But that's not really how it works. Our brains kind of make it impossible to stay on that level. And so everything comes in waves. Every single thing.
And
so it goes up and down.
Challenge, every challenge is an opportunity. Without challenge, there is no opportunity. It's without the dramas and the burdens. Enlightenment is a very boring, senseless state of being. You don't want to remain in that state because it's pointless.
Though. You can't remain in that state. Your brain won't let you. It's just the psychology of a human being.
You are fundamentally designed to produce challenges for the sake of overcoming them, for the sake of proving yourself, for the sake of bettering yourself.
Which I say that's just part of it. That's just... I accept as that just being
that's just a
natural thing.
That's the overall it of it. That's the real thing. Is that, people say that people like to equate life to being like a school where we're here to learn certain lessons, but who's teaching them? Why would we be, what are we learning about? We're not here to discover anything. We're here to create it. We're here to define it. We're here to produce it. You're not here
learning any
lessons.
whether you like it or not.
Right. You are
creating.
You are making use of this resource, this magical technology.
All the time, yeah.
Every moment of every day. You cannot stop doing it. The decision that you're ultimately making is whether you're aware of doing it or not, whether you are taking responsibility, thereby power and control over it or not.
Absolutely.
And I mean, while we have this idea of, I guess, the woke community, their idea of wokeness is full tolerance and acceptance of all things, but that's not the responsible decision either. There are pieces of our identity, our collective identity, that we don't want, that are not functioning, that are broken.
That should be discarded. And I think it's hard to discern, but that's part of the work and the responsibility, is to try to discern, really get to the meat of certain issues and certain things, and look at it with a keen eye. You can't just black and white everything. That's not how it fucking works. There is nothing but shades of gray.
But ultimately, it is in fact a black and white situation. The shades of gray is the black and white scenario. See, this is where, again, we're approaching the boundary where there's going to be a paradox inherent in everything, and that's where you get to the edge of eternity, and essentially there's a magic trick that occurs that causes for the bars of the cage to disappear. As I've stated so many times, it seems like it goes on and on forever because it reflects and it becomes paradoxical, but the actual absolute situation as it's occurring, if you look at it, it's a paradox. It's always going to be both and neither, all of the above.
Yeah, that's the deeper kind of thing that I think is a lot harder to explain, but what we're talking about.
Right, we can't really, that's why I created the course Approaching Nowhere, to refer to personal experiences, because it's approaching nowhere, or now and here being the only real premise. That's, again, coming to an absolute situation. You're always now, you're always here. You can't get out of that.
You are nowhere.
No matter what you do, you can never get out of being now here, which is nowhere. That's one of the broader sign. That's the signpost at the edge of the boundary saying don't cross this threshold.
Which I think
that's the dweller on the threshold.
It's important that you brought that up, because there's so many of those in the etymology of the language that we're speaking. And since we spoke so much about the importance of responsibility, that's another one. Mm-hmm. It's the ability to respond in the desirable manner that's going to benefit you and everyone else.
Or in a negative manner. And again, we have, like I stated with the Little Bad Guy series, we have what we equate as being a conscience, or we acknowledge as being a conscience that's still small voice, the voice of God, as it were, trying to convince us to do the right thing, be the better person, that sort of thing. But then we also have that same voice pushing us to do what we consider to be wrong, or what we consider to be negative, because it's easier, or because it's more dramatic or more interesting.
Yeah, not because it's wrong.
It's not wrong.
There
is no right or wrong.
Right or wrong, exactly. It's just because it's easier.
Except for what you decide for it to be, and of course you have that decision to make. It's not only your challenge, but it's your opportunity. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we refer to when we speak to people being operative, is people actually being players in the game, being aware of the decisions they make, and ultimately
the ramifications
how they resound.
Of those things.
Exactly,
yes,
what the consequences are, because once you begin to see values in play, you can see how these aspects and values, these implications and associations, are going to begin affecting people around you. When you can see the values that make up the system of another person, which is what spotters do. We train to see the values in other people, and so we can see what filters they're viewing through. We can see how they're going to be viewing the values, especially if they're not lucid and they're seeing them subconsciously, as it were, which is another resounding factor of the reflective aspect of viewing things in reverse, is that as it stands, humanity, our waking awareness, is the actual subconscious. because the actual conscious awareness, that's the values in play, that's the greater plot afoot. And we can see this presenting where she said that the etymology of our current language is speaking these secret, sort of seemingly hidden truths to us, like the nowhere. Now and here, those are relatively new terms to be using. Those aren't the original terms we used, but that's presenting these values that we're seeing are presenting now. Why? Because we're moving towards now. We're moving towards what's actually happening. It's happening at the end point, wherever our destination is, and hence the concept of destiny. So that's, that's an indicator. That's a value speaking loud and clear that we have reached the destination already. We're just explaining it right now so we can have faith in the journey, and thereby faith in the God concept, because that's what the God concept actually is. It is the game playing itself.
Yeah. But you also, there has to be faith in yourself.
Well, I mean, you come to understand yourself as being it.
Yeah, pretty much. But we rambled for quite a
I
while,
think that hit what we needed to explain. Hopefully you guys watched it. I think it was interesting enough to have stuck aboard. So, there you go, spotters. Effectively, if you've watched this all the way through and you've gotten to this point, you've been equipped with everything that's necessary, and as per the nature of this particular investigation with the channeling thing, regardless of what you decide to do from this point forward, your decisions are going to be affected by the values that we've put into play. So, I mean, I suppose congratulations, you have effectively been conscripted into the greater war. You are now operatives of the initiative. Go forth and
are now
decide.
Responsible for all of your choices.
Yes, you are effectively.
Dun, dun,
You've been
dun.
informed. You are responsible for the decisions you make from here on out. And no, not a single one of them is not up to you. You do have that challenge, and that birthright, that sacred heritage belongs to you. This life belongs to you. Let your owner out. So that is that for that. Kila Salai. Our home world, ode to it, to our home world. This is our home. Terve Uni Ciari, forward together, all as one. Namaste. We recognize ourselves and deity in you in all things. We are reflections of each other. So, go forth and share your life. Thank you for attending.
Good night.